was really interesting and kind of motivated the expansion of our paper. She said, I quote, "I passed the toughest immigration law this country has ever seen against illegal immigration. Whereas Ron DeSantis, on the other hand, he only passed the E-Verify mandate before his announcement for his presidential run, and was suggesting it was only a political maneuvering for him to pass the mandate." So that motivates us, the research questions, like, do these toughest immigration laws like really work, or were they just part of their political campaign to make a statement and draw political voters' support? Now, before going to the detail of how we answer these questions, we gotta understand what is E-Verify. Now, it's a system was introduced in 1996. It used by employers to verify the employee's legal status to work. And it's mandated right now for federal employees and contractors to use. However, it is voluntary for private sectors to utilize in most states. In this picture that you see, like, there are 9 states as of now that have passed a mandate for both public and private sectors to use. So it's passed in Arizona in 2007, and then followed by Mississippi in 2008, Utah, and then a cohort of 5 southern states passed the same mandate around the 2012 presidential election cycle, and then joined by Florida, the most recent in 2023. I think the toughest question of this research is, how do you identify a person is undocumented, right? It's a question that is not included in public surveys, such as the data we utilize from American Community Survey. So we adopted a method by really famous labor economist Boyes, and in his 2017 paper, a bunch of exclusion criteria that we use to identify who is likely to be undocumented. And then we did a data descriptive analysis in the paper, and you can see like it's aligned with the national estimates closely, so we're confident about his method. So after we identify who is likely to be undocumented and their employment status in the data set, we use the synthetic control approach for the causal inference. And for those of you who doesn't know synthetic control, it's a method a little bit different from the traditional KID, assuming the parallel trend before treatment. Instead, we synthetically compose a control state that is closely allied with the pre-treatment trend for the treated states. And so in the control group, we have a bunch of the rest of the states that haven't passed the law, and use the weights that generated from the pre-treatment setting. We compose a post-treatment scenarios that could be like, if the treatment state hasn't passed the law, what it might look like in terms of the undocumented employment. So I think this approach is the most appropriate for our research purpose, is because the different timelines that I already introduced in previous slides, that different states that pass this law at different times. And then also, there are many variations within these policies, so that we like to do the interstate comparisons. And this approach gives us the ability to compare the impacts within. So if our prior is the strictest law or restrictive immigration policy is effective in reducing undocumented employment, then we should see a divergence post-treatment. However, what we found is surprising. E-Verify has no effect in most of the states that pass this law. And that includes South Carolina. And what Nikki Haley suggested, it was tough, but in our research, we actually showed that it did the same thing that she suggested it would. But it did work in 2 states, Arizona and Alabama. And it shows about 36% reduction in undocumented employment in Alabama, whereas in Arizona, it shows the most significant effect, around 46% reduction in undocumented people's employment. And then this is the part we expanded from our previous research, is that you naturally ask why. Why we're seeing these variations, why it doesn't work in most states. And that's the most interesting part, I think, of this research, is that we found most of the states pass this law is during election cycles. That could be suggesting it was part of the political maneuvering strategy suggested by Nikki Haley. And also we saw many exemptions, legal jargons in the bills, loopholes, different definitions for even employees, what is employee, what is employers. And made us think that most of these policies were written in a way so that undocumented workers could still work. And that's weird, right? That's so contrary than what they say will accomplish. So just give you some examples like what we're seeing in these bills. In North Carolina and Florida, they exempt employers under the size of 25 employees. And in Florida, they also say it only applies to permanent employees. Now, what is permanent? How do you define permanent? Are you suggesting like agricultural workers that is mainly seasonal are fully exempt from this policy? So that's why we think it's part of the political campaign or their political maneuvering or this posturing, like it's so different from what's said in the policy itself. And why do they do that? Because they have multiple objectives to balance. On one side, research have shown that most of the public right now, or in recent decades, favor restrictive immigration policies. So by passing these laws might gain them some support from the voters. Where on the other hand, there are realities on the ground. Is it gonna affect the industry such as agriculture that is heavily reliant on the undocumented workforce? And the economic considerations, right? Like Florida or Georgia are really heavily dependent on agricultural industries. And these are the realities they have to balance and think about. So I think the contributions of this paper is that first, we answer Nikki Haley's question, and we have to agree with her, is that most of these policies don't work, and it's part of the political campaign or posturing they're doing. But so is hers. It did not work. And I think it's very timely and relevant in terms of what we are seeing nationwide right now, and perhaps in the 4 years, we might see more of such policies coming up. So it's very important to keep the research like this going to see the potential impact on our stakeholders or relevant industries such as agriculture.